People who realized their therapist was actually making them worse. What made you finally see it? Dr. Vivian Blackwell's office smelled like lavender and lies. I sat on her gray velvet couch for the 47th time, my hands shaking as I tried to explain why I couldn't sleep anymore. She leaned forward in her leather chair, pen hovering over her notepad, and asked me the same question she always did. Have you considered that your anxiety might be your way of punishing yourself for not being good enough? The words hit different that day. Not because they were new, but because I'd heard them so many times they'd become my internal voice. Every panic attack, every sleepless night, I blamed myself for not being good enough. For 6 months, Dr. Blackwell had been treating my anxiety disorder. For 6 months, I'd gotten progressively worse. My name is Autumn Pierce, and I'm 28 years old. Before Dr. Blackwell, I had manageable anxiety that flared up during stressful work periods. I was a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm, good at my job, had friends, dated occasionally, normal life with normal problems. Then my mom died suddenly from a stroke, and I fell apart. My primary care doctor recommended Dr. Blackwell, said she specialized in grief and anxiety. Insurance covered it. The first session felt like relief. Someone was finally going to help me feel normal again. Dr. Blackwell had a corner office in a medical building downtown, framed degrees from prestigious universities, a calm voice that made you want to trust her. She diagnosed me with generalized anxiety disorder in our second session and started me on cognitive behavioral therapy. The changes were subtle at first. Dr. Blackwell would ask about my week, then point out everything I'd done wrong. Went to dinner with friends? You're using social situations to avoid processing your grief. Stayed home alone? You're isolating yourself, which feeds the anxiety. Tried meditation? You're looking for quick fixes instead of doing the real work. Every single thing I did was wrong according to her. She'd nod sympathetically while explaining how my choices were sabotaging my own healing. I started second-guessing everything. Should I call my friend back, or was I being needy? Should I take that freelance project, or was I avoiding my feelings? The anxiety that used to spike occasionally became a constant hum in my chest. I told Dr. Blackwell this in our 8th session. She wrote something in her notes and said, "You're experiencing resistance to the therapeutic process. That's normal when we're getting close to the real issues." My sessions started costing me more than just the copay. I'd leave her office feeling worse than when I arrived, so wrung out I couldn't work for the rest of the day. My boss, Patricia, commented on my decreased productivity in our monthly check-in. I explained I was in therapy working through some things. She was understanding at first, gave me flexibility with deadlines, but Dr. Blackwell kept telling me my job stress was a manifestation of deeper self-worth issues. "You're afraid of success because you don't believe you deserve it," she said in our 12th session. I started missing deadlines, calling in sick more often. Patricia pulled me aside after I handed in a half-finished project. Her concern was genuine, but I heard Dr. Blackwell's voice in my head. People showing concern is triggering your fear of being seen as weak. I pushed Patricia away, stopped accepting help from coworkers, ate lunch alone every day. The sleep problems got worse. I'd lie awake replaying sessions with Dr. Blackwell, analyzing everything I'd said, wondering what I'd revealed that I didn't mean to. She'd started asking deeper questions about my childhood, my relationship with my parents, whether I'd ever felt truly loved. I had a normal childhood. Not perfect, but normal. Middle-class family, supportive parents, younger brother I got along with fine. But Dr. Blackwell would take normal memories and find darkness in them. "Your mother worked full-time when you were young?" she asked in our 15th session. I said yes, both my parents worked. "So you were essentially abandoned during formative years. That's where your anxiety stems from. You learned early that you couldn't depend on anyone." I tried to explain that I had good daycare. My grandmother helped out. I never felt abandoned. Dr. Blackwell smiled that patient smile and said, "Denial is part of the healing process." 4 months into therapy, I started having panic attacks at work. Full-blown, can't-breathe, heart-racing episodes that sent me to the bathroom to hide until they passed. I told Dr. Blackwell this was new. I'd never had panic attacks before. She said we were making progress. "Your subconscious is bringing repressed trauma to the surface. This is good, Autumn. We're finally accessing the real pain." She increased our sessions to twice a week. My insurance only covered 1 session weekly, so I started paying out of pocket for the second. $200 a session, $400 a week. My savings account drained while my mental health spiraled. I couldn't see the connection yet. I trusted her completely. My best friend Layla noticed something was wrong when I canceled our standing Sunday brunch for the 3rd week in a row. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago, found me in bed at 2 in the afternoon, curtains drawn, surrounded by self-help books Dr. Blackwell had recommended. Layla sat on the edge of my bed and asked what was happening. I started crying, told her everything. The therapy, the anxiety getting worse, the panic attacks, Dr. Blackwell's explanations about repressed trauma and self-sabotage. Layla listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked a simple question. "Has anything gotten better since you started seeing her?" I couldn't answer. Layla pulled the curtains open, let sunlight flood the room. "You need a second opinion," she said. I got defensive. Told Layla she didn't understand. Therapy was hard work. Getting worse before getting better was normal. Dr. Blackwell had prepared me for this. She'd warned me that people in my life might not support my healing journey, that they might feel threatened by my growth and change. They want you to stay the same because it's comfortable for them, Dr. Blackwell had said. I repeated this to Layla almost word for word. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "Does that sound like something you would say? Or something she told you to think?" The question planted a seed of doubt I tried desperately to ignore. Layla left after making me promise to at least consider talking to another therapist. I promised, but had no intention of following through. Dr. Blackwell was helping me. I just needed to trust the process. The breaking point came during my 30-second session. Dr. Blackwell asked about my relationship with my brother, Felix. We'd always been close despite the 3-year age gap. He was a software engineer in Seattle. We video called weekly, texted random memes to each other. Normal sibling relationship. But Dr. Blackwell wanted to talk about competition, jealousy, whether I resented him for being more successful. I said I didn't. I was proud of him. She wrote something down. Interesting that you frame his accomplishments in relation to your feelings. That suggests you see his success as a reflection of your failure. I tried to clarify, got tangled in my words, ended up agreeing with her just to move on. Then she asked, "Has Felix ever made you feel inferior?" I said no, never. She tilted her head. You answered very quickly. That's usually a sign of repression. That session ended with Dr. Blackwell suggesting I might need to distance myself from Felix temporarily. He's a trigger for your anxiety, she explained. Until you work through your feelings of inadequacy, interacting with him will continue to cause distress. I left her office feeling sick. Felix wasn't a trigger. He was my brother, one of the few people who still made me laugh. But I found myself screening his calls that week. When he finally caught me, I was distant, short with my answers. He asked if something was wrong. I lied and said I was busy with work. After we hung up, I cried for 2 hours. Something felt fundamentally wrong, but I couldn't name it. The doubt Layla had planted was growing. I started researching therapy online, found articles about effective treatment, what results to expect, warning signs of bad therapy. One article from a mental health advocacy site listed red flags. Therapist who makes you feel worse over time. Therapist who blames you for lack of progress. Therapist who isolates you from support systems. Therapist who creates dependency. I read through the list 3 times. Every single point described my experience with Dr. Blackwell. The article included testimonials from people who'd been harmed by unethical therapists. Their stories sounded like mine, getting worse instead of better, being told it was their fault, losing jobs, relationships, savings. I felt like I was reading my own future. That night, I did something I should have done months ago. I looked up Dr. Blackwell's credentials. Her website listed a PhD in clinical psychology from Northeastern University, licensed in 3 states, 20 years of experience. It looked legitimate, but something made me dig deeper. I found a database of licensed therapists run by the State Board of Psychology. Searched her name. The results confused me at first. There was a Vivian Blackwell listed, but the license number didn't match the one on her website. I searched by license number. Different name, different person, someone practicing in a city 3 hours away. My hands started shaking as I refreshed the page multiple times. The results didn't change. I spent the next 4 hours going down a rabbit hole. Called the main line for the state licensing board. Got a recorded message with office hours. Searched Dr. Blackwell's university records. Found a Vivian Blackwell who graduated with a master's degree in counseling, not a PhD in clinical psychology. The photos didn't match. I pulled up her website again, examined her credentials more carefully. The framing looked professional, but the dates didn't add up. She claimed to have gotten her PhD in 1998, but the university website showed that program wasn't established until 2003. I felt physically ill. Either I was making connections that weren't there, or the woman I'd been paying $400 a week was lying about her qualifications. Monday morning, I called the state licensing board the minute they opened. Explained the situation to a woman named Ruth who worked in their verification department. She put me on hold, came back 5 minutes later with concern in her voice. There was no active license for a Vivian Blackwell practicing in our city. The only Vivian Blackwell licensed in our state was a school counselor working in a different county, and she'd confirmed she wasn't seeing private clients. Ruth asked for the address of the office where I'd been receiving treatment. She said she'd look into it and someone would contact me. She took my information carefully, asked if I'd paid Dr. Blackwell directly or through insurance. I said both. Insurance covered 1 session. I paid cash for the second weekly session. Ruth's silence lasted too long. Ms. Pierce, I need to ask you not to confront this person directly. If what you're describing is accurate, this is a criminal matter. I went to work in a daze. Patricia called me into her office mid-morning. I thought I was being fired. Instead, she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of my work from the past 6 months, arranged chronologically. The decline was obvious even to me. Autumn, I care about you, Patricia said. But I need to understand what's happening. You've been one of our best designers for 3 years. These last 6 months, it's like you're a different person. I started crying right there in her office. Told her everything. The therapy, the fake credentials, the way I'd gotten worse and worse. Patricia listened without judgment. When I finished, She said something that cut through all the confusion. You came to me 6 months ago asking for flexibility because you were grieving your mother. You were sad but functional. Now you can barely make it through a day. Does that sound like successful treatment to you? That afternoon, I received a call from Detective Iris Kowalski with the Fraud Division. Ruth from the licensing board had filed a report, and they wanted to meet with me. I drove to the police station after work, sat in a small interview room while Detective Kowalski and her partner, Detective Aaron Tate, asked me to describe everything from the beginning. How I found Dr. Blackwell, what she told me about her credentials, what happened in our sessions, how much money I'd paid her. They recorded my statement, took copies of the receipts I'd saved. Detective Kowalski explained that practicing therapy without a license was a felony. If Dr. Blackwell had intentionally deceived me about her qualifications, that was fraud. How many other people is she seeing? I asked. Detective Kowalski said they didn't know yet, but they were going to find out. I went home and made a list of everything Dr. Blackwell had told me about myself. The abandonment issues that didn't exist, the repressed trauma from a normal childhood, the self-sabotage, the fear of success, the toxic relationship with my brother. None of it was real. She'd made me believe I was fundamentally broken, that my anxiety was my fault, that I deserved to feel terrible because I wasn't working hard enough to heal. The anger hit me all at once. I'd paid her thousands of dollars to make me worse. I'd lost productivity at work, pushed away friends, distanced myself from my brother, all because I trusted someone claiming to be a professional. The violation felt intimate and horrible. She'd been inside my head, manipulating my thoughts, and I'd given her permission. Detective Kowalski called 3 days later. They'd executed a search warrant on Dr. Blackwell's office, found files on 43 active clients, records going back 5 years. She'd been operating under a fake license number, using credentials that belonged to someone else, billing insurance companies for services she wasn't qualified to provide. The detectives found templates on her computer for the notes she'd supposedly been taking during sessions, generic observations with blanks to fill in names and details. My sessions weren't therapy. They were a script she followed to keep me coming back. Detective Kowalski asked if I'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial. I said yes immediately. The district attorney's office reached out within a week. A prosecutor named Benjamin Kim was building a case against Dr. Blackwell for fraud, identity theft, and unlicensed practice of medicine. He needed victims willing to go public. I agreed to be interviewed, signed releases for them to access my medical records and insurance claims. Benjamin explained that many of Dr. Blackwell's clients might not even realize they'd been harmed. She'd been careful to target people like me who were vulnerable, dealing with grief or trauma, isolated from strong support systems, people who wouldn't question her authority or realize they were getting worse until it was too late. He estimated she'd collected over $2 million from clients and insurance fraud over 5 years. I called Layla and apologized for pushing her away. She came over that night with Chinese food and let me ugly cry on her shoulder for an hour. I feel so stupid, I told her. How did I not see it? Layla reminded me that I was grieving my mother, that I was vulnerable, that Dr. Blackwell was a professional manipulator. You were looking for help, and she saw an opportunity. That's not your fault. But it felt like my fault. I'd ignored red flags, dismissed my own instincts, let her convince me that my judgment was the problem. Layla stayed until midnight, made me promise to call her anytime I needed to talk. As she left, she said something that stuck with me. The fact that you figured it out means you're stronger than you think. A lot of people never do. The next morning I called Felix. He answered on the second ring, surprise in his voice because I'd been avoiding him for weeks. I apologized for being distant, explained everything that had happened. Felix was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then he said, Autumn, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And I'm sorry I didn't push harder when you seemed off. We talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation we'd had in months. He asked what I needed. I said I needed to know he didn't hate me for cutting him out. Felix laughed, said, You're my sister. You could rob a bank, and I'd still show up with bail money. The relief was overwhelming. Dr. Blackwell had tried to destroy one of the most important relationships in my life. She'd almost succeeded. I found a real therapist through a referral from Patricia's wife, who was a psychiatric nurse. Dr. Maya Okonkwo had impeccable credentials I verified thoroughly before our first appointment. She listened to my story without judgment, acknowledged the harm I'd experienced, and made clear what real therapy looked like. You should feel supported and challenged, but never diminished, she said. Therapy should help you build skills and confidence, not tear you down. Working with Dr. Okonkwo was night and day different from sessions with Dr. Blackwell. We focused on grief processing for my mother's death, developed actual coping strategies for anxiety, worked on rebuilding trust in my own judgment. Within 3 months, I was sleeping better, having fewer panic attacks, engaging with friends again. The real healing happened when I had real help. Benjamin Kim called me 6 months after my first police statement. The trial date was set. Dr. Blackwell, whose real name was Vivian Shaw, was facing 32 counts of fraud and unlicensed practice. 18 victims were willing to testify. Benjamin walked me through what to expect in court. The defense would try to discredit us, claim we were mentally unstable and misremembering events. They'll make you feel like you're on trial, he warned. But remember, The evidence is overwhelming. Financial records, fake credentials, testimony from multiple victims. She's not walking away from this. I steeled myself for the process. Testifying meant reliving the worst 6 months of my life in public, but it also meant other people might avoid the same fate. The preliminary hearing was brutal. I sat in the gallery watching Vivian Shaw in court for the first time since I'd discovered her lies. She looked smaller than I remembered, ordinary in a navy suit, her lawyer whispering in her ear. When she looked up and made eye contact with me, I saw no remorse. Just calculation, like she was still trying to figure out how to manipulate the situation. The prosecution presented evidence: fake license documentation, financial records showing $2 million in fraudulent billing, testimony from the real Vivian Blackwell whose credentials had been stolen. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and potential danger to the public. As they led her out in handcuffs, I felt something shift inside me. She didn't have power over me anymore. The trial took 3 weeks. I testified on day 4, spent 6 hours on the stand describing my treatment, how I got worse, the moment I realized her credentials were fake. The defense attorney tried to rattle me, suggested I was exaggerating symptoms for attention, implied I was too mentally unstable to be a reliable witness. Benjamin objected repeatedly, but the questions still stung. During cross-examination, the defense attorney asked, "Isn't it true that your anxiety issues existed before you met Ms. Shaw?" I said yes. That's why I sought treatment. So how can you be certain she made you worse, and not that your underlying conditions simply progressed naturally? I took a breath, remembered Dr. Okonkwo's advice to trust myself, because I know what anxiety feels like. I'd lived with it for years. What I experienced under her care wasn't progression. It was destruction. Other victims testified throughout the week. A man named Garrett who'd lost his job and wife because Vivian convinced him his marriage was toxic and he needed to isolate himself to heal. A college student named Priya who'd developed an eating disorder after Vivian suggested her weight was a manifestation of self-hatred. A widow named Claire who'd been seeing Vivian for 4 years, paying cash for twice-weekly sessions that left her suicidal and broke. Each story was different, but the pattern was identical. Vivian targeted vulnerable people, made them worse, created dependency, and drained their resources. The prosecution's expert witness, a psychiatrist named Dr. Leonard Hayes, testified that Vivian's methods were textbook examples of psychological manipulation designed to maintain control rather than facilitate healing. The financial forensics investigator testified about the money trail. Vivian had 3 separate bank accounts, one for insurance billing, one for cash payments, one personal. She'd been moving money between accounts to hide the volume of fraud. The fake license she'd used belonged to a woman in another state whose identity she'd partially stolen. She'd created an entirely fabricated educational history, even forged transcripts from universities she'd never attended. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't someone who'd accidentally misrepresented their credentials. This was a deliberate, calculated scheme to exploit people in crisis. But Vivian's defense was that she genuinely believed she was helping people, that she had training even if it wasn't formal licensure, that the outcomes weren't as bad as we claimed. Her attorney called witnesses who'd seen her in the community, painted her as a caring person who'd made mistakes but meant well. The prosecution systematically dismantled this narrative, showed emails where Vivian discussed specific techniques for keeping clients dependent, found notes where she'd marked which clients had good insurance or significant savings, presented testimony from a former office manager who said Vivian had explicitly told her to schedule clients when they were at their lowest, because that's when they'd be most compliant. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was comprehensive. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. I sat in the hallway with other victims, everyone tense and quiet, wondering if justice would actually happen. When the bailiff called us back, my heart was racing. The jury foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all 32 counts. The courtroom erupted. Some people cried, others hugged each other. I sat frozen, letting the reality sink in. It was over. She'd been held accountable. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. As they led Vivian out, she turned and looked at those of us in the gallery. I met her eyes and didn't look away. Whatever power she'd once had was gone. Sentencing day brought closure I hadn't known I needed. The judge allowed victim impact statements. I stood at the podium and spoke directly to Vivian, told her exactly what she'd taken from me. The months of unnecessary suffering, the damaged relationships, the destroyed sense of self, the lost savings. You were supposed to help people in their darkest moments. Instead, you exploited that darkness for profit. You don't get to pretend you didn't know what you were doing. 18 other victims gave statements, each one more devastating than the last. The judge listened to every word. When it was his turn to speak, he was unsparing. He called her actions predatory and unconscionable, said she'd violated the fundamental trust that makes healthcare possible. He sentenced her to 15 years in prison, ordered her to pay full restitution to all victims, and banned her from ever working in any healthcare capacity. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in over a year. The sun was bright, the air was crisp, and I was free. Layla was waiting outside, along with Felix who'd flown in for the sentencing. They wrapped me in a hug, and we stood there for a long moment. 3 people who'd survived something terrible. Benjamin Kim came over to shake my hand, told told me I'd been a powerful witness, thanked me for my courage. I thanked him for believing us. As we walked to get lunch, Felix asked how I was feeling. I thought about it honestly. The damage Vivian had done still lingered. I still had anxiety, still had days when trust was hard, still had moments when I second-guessed my own judgment. But I was healing now, really healing, with real support, making real progress. I'd learned to recognize manipulation, to trust my instincts, to ask for help when I needed it. 6 months after sentencing, I testified before the state legislature about gaps in the mental health care system that allowed Vivian to operate for 5 years. I sat at a table facing a room full of legislators and told my story again, this time not for prosecution, but for prevention. The committee was drafting new regulations, requiring stricter credential verification, creating a public database of disciplinary actions against healthcare providers, establishing penalties for platforms that allowed unlicensed practitioners to advertise. The bill passed unanimously 3 months later. It was named the Healthcare Transparency Act. Benjamin told me it would prevent other Vivians from operating in the shadows. That felt like purpose emerging from pain. I returned to work full-time at the marketing firm. Patricia had held my position during the worst months, gave me space to heal, welcomed me back without hesitation. My design work improved as my mental health stabilized. I took on bigger clients, mentored junior designers, even got promoted to senior art director. The career I'd almost lost to Vivian's manipulation was thriving. More than that, I'd learned to advocate for myself, to recognize when something felt wrong, to trust that my perception of reality was valid. Those were skills Vivian had tried to destroy. Instead, fighting back against her had made them stronger. Dr. Okonkwo and I still meet monthly for maintenance therapy. The difference between her approach and Vivian's is stark in retrospect. Real therapy builds you up, teaches you skills, helps you process pain without making you drown in it. It's collaborative, transparent, with clear goals and measurable progress. I'd never understood that before because I'd never experienced it. Now I did. And that knowledge was armor against future manipulation. I also became vocal online about warning signs of bad therapy, sharing my story on mental health forums to help others recognize red flags before they got hurt. The responses were overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out to say they'd experienced similar situations or were currently in them and didn't know how to get out. 2 years after the trial, I was contacted by a journalist named Diana Wu, who was writing a book about healthcare fraud. She wanted to feature my case as a central narrative. I agreed, with the condition that other victims would be included and anonymous if they chose. The book came out a year later, titled The Trust Thieves: Inside America's Mental Health Care Crisis. It became a bestseller, sparked national conversations about licensure requirements and patient protections. I did interviews, spoke at conferences, became accidentally famous in healthcare advocacy circles. It was surreal and uncomfortable at times, but it felt important. Vivian had stolen so much from so many people. The least I could do was make sure her story served as a warning. The restitution money came in slowly, garnished from the prison commissary job Vivian was required to work. It would take decades to repay what she'd stolen, but the symbolic gesture mattered. Every check that arrived felt like another piece of justice. I put the money in a savings account earmarked for therapy and mental health resources for people who couldn't afford it. Started a small foundation that provided grants for low-income individuals to access verified, licensed therapists. Layla helped me set it up. Felix managed the technical infrastructure. Within 2 years, we'd helped over 100 people get real treatment. That felt like alchemy, turning the worst experience of my life into something that helped others avoid the same fate. I still think about those 6 months sometimes. The woman I was then, so lost and desperate for help, trusting someone who saw vulnerability as opportunity. I grieve for her, for the suffering she endured unnecessarily, for the time she lost. But I don't blame her anymore. She was doing her best in an impossible situation, betrayed by someone claiming to help. What Vivian did wasn't therapy. It was psychological terrorism disguised as healthcare. Recognizing that distinction took time, but it freed me from the shame I'd carried. I wasn't weak for being manipulated. I was human for needing help and brave for fighting back when I realized something was wrong. 3 years post-trial, Vivian's appeal was denied. She would serve her full sentence with no early release. The news came through while I was having dinner with Felix and Layla, celebrating Layla's engagement. I read the notification on my phone and felt something release inside my chest. Complete closure. She was gone. Really gone. And I was here, surrounded by people who loved me, living a life she'd tried to destroy. I raised my glass and made a toast. To surviving terrible people and building something better. We clinked glasses and moved on to other topics, other joys, other moments that had nothing to do with her. That felt like the truest victory. She'd taken up so much space in my life, and now she barely registered. I had reclaimed myself completely. The foundation grew beyond what I'd imagined, helping hundreds access real mental health care. I still practice design, but spend weekends running workshops on recognizing predatory practices in therapy. Layla married her partner last spring. Felix moved back east to be closer to family. Life moved forward in ways both ordinary and beautiful, marked by small victories and steady healing rather than dramatic upheaval. Vivian Shaw became a cautionary tale. Her case taught in ethics classes and licensing programs, 18 lives she tried to destroy instead became testimonies that changed systemic protections for thousands. That's justice beyond a verdict, turning pain into purpose, survival into advocacy, and making damn sure nobody else falls through the cracks we fell through. Some mornings I wake up and still check her credentials against the licensing board database, a habit born of hard lessons. The real Vivian Blackwell is still practicing as a school counselor 3 counties over, her identity returned after years of theft. We've never met, but I think about her sometimes, another victim in Vivian Shaw's wake. The difference is I found my way out and made sure the door stayed open for everyone else still trying to escape. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.